General Motors had an employee named Raymond DiGiorgio. He thought of himself as a dedicated and well-behaved employee. He claims he never had lied, stole, or cheated during his 23 years that he was employed by General Motors. Leading up to the incident, Raymond was blamed for many of things, including starting the worst safety crisis in history, which was leaving cars on the road in conditions that were terrible and not to be driven. Raymond was a 65-year-old man whom was dismissed in June of 2015 from General Motors. He was responsible for many deaths because of the defect switch in cars. He had violated company policy by ordering parts with new part numbers. While it may have fixed some future car problems, it still led to defects in cars and left many at risk on the road. The structure of his life was found out through interviews, and it was found that he was not an honest employee. His purpose at General Motors was to fix the issues of the switch, but in a legal manner, which he was not doing. So when things started to go wrong in the cars, General Motors should have stepped in to evaluate closer. Raymond would change the switches in cars, leading to many car accidents, malfunctions, and even death. He would even violate the company policy by ordering a modified switch without a new order part number. So during operation, he was not always supervised, which is what led him to doing as he pleased. Raymond had many interviews and questioning sessions for him to explain himself. He then admitted to his wrongdoings, considering he knew he was going to be in big trouble. I found this very interesting that for so long he played innocent and swore up and down that he did nothing unethical and wrong, but these things ended up catching up to him, and he knew that he was going to be in deep water. The incident became a huge crisis when several deaths were being reported and tied back into General Motors cars. After investigations, the engines and switches were the causes of the accidents, and it was proven not to be the driver's faults. This obviously raises a big red flag and points right back to Raymond, considering he was the one making all of these unauthorized changes. Many of the cars from General Motors were defective, but it took years of investigating and interviews to realize that Raymond was the cause of all these defective cars. Raymond should have communicated better with General Motors, noticing deaths were being caused, and handle the crisis in a way different manner. Handling the crisis in a different manner would have not been going against company policy to order parts with zero information regarding the purchase. There were emails of proof that were found that were traced to find actions that Raymond had done, and being able to identify cars of the same make and model but with different parts that were a part of these accidents. An article by Bill Vlasic stated Mr. DiGiorgio's testimony revived an internal inquiry of the ignition switch that led to recalls of 2.6 million small cars starting in February, and that has ruined their reputation and cost them billions of dollars. This could have all been prevented if Raymond followed the company's rules and regulations. Raymond doing these things, switching all of these parts, all of that stuff could have looked like it could have been a good idea in his head, especially if he was trying to save money and do all these other things. But with people dying, cars breaking left and right, and lawsuits that were going to be in the future, he ended up creating a complete disaster. So the opponents of Raymond are all of the victims and families of the victims affected by the switch. There were many deaths because of these switches. Of all of the people who were killed in the car crashes, their families are the opponents of Raymond as well. Their families have suffered and are still suffering from the loss of a loved one. One of the birth mothers made a comment about the challenge that she's been facing since the loss of her daughter, Amber. Her mother had stated that the pain that Raymond feels is nothing compared to the loss of a family member. Her challenge has been just sitting back and listening to reports and reading and watching all of the statements from Raymond, especially because in the beginning he was claiming to have no part in it and be innocent, and then obviously it came out that it was pretty much all of his fault. So other families are still suffering from pain and the loss of their families because of the ignition switches that Raymond was responsible for. The key consequences of the crisis are punishment and awareness. Any engineer or mechanic needs to do their work in the proper way and get their work authorized and be supervised. If they fail to do so, they are letting a defective machine out without knowing what will happen to it, and as a result, death can be one of those results. Of that defective machine, a broken down car, so much money lost, and so many other legal troubles. Raymond is definitely 100% deserves a punishment for the unauthorized actions he performed and for all of the deaths and car troubles that were caused because of these unauthorized defective switches. So Raymond was considered to look at and be a great employee and human, but those things do not make up for his very wrongdoings. He should not have gone behind company policy and violated it. This was not only unauthorized actions, but these actions were extremely unethical. He's caused many families to become upset by the loss of their family members, and he has caused a lot of families to experience inconvenient car troubles for zero reason at all, and he broke the trust of many people. I have chosen to focus on what new regulations should be enacted to keep this from happening, the reparation that should be made to victims' families, and General Motors knowing about the faulty switch and the steps they took. So all employees should be drug tested upon being hired and every 60 days after, and have background checks done. Employees should be checked for drug screenings to make sure they're not under the influence while on the clock. I do believe that Raymond needs to apologize to the public for his actions and sincerely apologize in person to the families who lost a family member because of the ignition switch. Government regulators did not act sooner because they were waiting to build up enough evidence to prove that it was Raymond's fault. But this affects Raymond because there is no denying he was at fault, and this helps make sure that Raymond will be punished for his wrongdoings. The reparation that needs to be enacted is Raymond apologizing to the public for his actions and apologize to the family members. General Motors admitted to knowing about the switch, but they did not come forward at first because they did not want to take responsibility for the situation. They held off as long as they could, and once the situation became a crisis, then they had no choice but to pay their dues and follow the punishments. So the position statement reflects the nature of the stakeholder because it shows he has done damage and needs to apologize. He will never be able to live a normal life because of everything that he did. His reputation will forever be ruined, and he will serve jail time for what he did. Raymond did not only hurt himself and the company he worked for, but he hurt families and caused several deaths as well. And on top of that, General Motors had to pay a lot of money and fines. General Motors and Raymond have no support in this situation. They both face a challenge. General Motors was left with a bunch of fines, and Raymond served a lot of jail time. And both stakeholders received a lot of hate, but that is something they will have to deal with for the rest of their lives.